well, thank you all so much for joining us for SpaceX, Birth of Commercial Spaceflight. For the past 20 years, Elon Musk has been building an enormous commercial spaceflight company. Unlike Boeing, United Launch Alliance, Blue Origin, or Virgin Galactic, SpaceX has revolutionized the space industry. While most of the non-governmental efforts can be described charitably as ploddingly slow and painfully predictable, Musk and SpaceX has been surprisingly bold, breathtakingly fast, and successful. So today's virtual presentation is led by David S. Ball, who's a volunteer educator with NASA. As a solar system ambassador with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, he presents topics related to American activities in space. So all 50 of us or so, let's give a big virtual round of applause to David for joining us here this morning. And David, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Hey, Robert, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to Tewksbury and the other libraries who bring together people who have a passion about spaceflight to be able to celebrate that. And you know, last time we were together, we were talking about the Webb Space Telescope, and I said if you invited me back, we would talk about Elon Musk, and so that's what I wanted to talk about today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I want to say, you can see I've got a new shirt that says SpaceX, and so I ordered it specifically for today, and it comes in a plastic bag, and on the outside it says Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, designed and tested for interplanetary transport. Now, ordinarily, when you see this on a plastic bag, to me it just strikes me as you know, PR hoopla. But by the end of this presentation, I think you're going to look at that and say, I wonder if maybe they qualified this for spaceflight or something. There's something about SpaceX and Elon Musk that is very intentional and very successful, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So here we are. Hopefully you can see my screen, and there's the heroic Elon Musk and his rocket ships. You know, commercial space has been a long time coming. If we compare it to aviation, the airplanes invented in 1903, and by 1920 you start to have commercial aviation, and by 1925, 1926, they're already carrying the mail and they're carrying passengers, and you know, there's a pretty quick handoff from governmental to corporate. That's not happened in space, and it's starting to happen now, and it's very exciting. So that's what I want to share with you. So just in context, in 1903, in December, the Wright brothers invent the airplane, and so in that year, 1903, there were no passengers, and over time, that obviously changed. So 50 years in the future, in 1953, they reached a milestone where 50 million people that year had traveled in an airplane. 50 million people, okay? Now, in context, in 2019, the number of people who traveled by airplane was 4.5 billion. Half the people on the planet. You probably don't know somebody who hasn't traveled in an airplane. So obviously, there's been a great impact, aviation on people. Let's contrast that with spaceflight. So in 1961, the number of people that had been in orbit all over the, you know, all the people in the world for all of time was 2 people, and they were both Russians. In 2018, the number of people is 556. Now that's 556 people from anywhere on the planet for all time, 556, all right? And we're starting to get some change. In 2022, we've reached a point where we've had a dozen people who are not, you know, military test pilots and doing 9Gs and stuff like that. We're starting to get people to go into space. And when we look at how that why that is, it's because it's difficult to get to space. It's very expensive. And one of the things that that Elon Musk has done, or really two of the things that I think set him apart. One is he understands how important it is to get the economics right and to reuse rockets. And the other has to do with production facilities. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. So when you look at the spacecraft over on the left, that's the Saturn V, took Neil Armstrong to the moon. It's got the F1 engines on the first stage, and then you've got the second, third, fourth stage, the service module, lunar module, all that kind of stuff. None of that is reusable. You spend $1.5 billion to get 3 guys in a seat to go to the moon and come back. $1.5 billion bucks. Now, when you talk to Elon Musk, he says, can you imagine if you had that Dreamliner, that 787 airplane, and you went somewhere, and at the end of that flight, you just discarded the airplane? How could you possibly do that? How could you afford to do that? And the answer is you can't. You have to reuse spacecraft. That's the only way to get the cost down. So you look over on the right, and we're looking at the Starship, which is his next generation of spaceship. And he can put, or the plan is to put 150 tons into orbit on a reusable spacecraft. And if it's going to be an expendable one, he can do 250 tons. And that brings the price per pound down, and it makes all kinds of things possible. So let's look at the economics of spaceflight. Let's say, for example, that you want to put a satellite into orbit, or you want to put an astronaut into orbit. You have a number of different launch vehicles. Here's the Saturn V, here's the Delta, the Soyuz made by the Russians, Long March, which is Chinese. And you can see the first years that they had successful launches, how many times they've launched their rockets, and how much in millions of dollars each launch costs. So the Saturn V, $783 million to launch it. The cost to put a pound into orbit, $11,000. And over time, over a number of years, the cost to put something into orbit has run about $10,000 a pound. And so the kinds of things that you put into orbit have to be things that give you a high rate of return. So semiconductors, things for bioengineering, very high tech, very high return kinds of things. You wouldn't do something that didn't have a high payoff. And then over on the right, I put, if you took the cost per pound and you had a 200-pound astronaut, what would it cost to put an astronaut into orbit? So for the Saturn V, it costs $2 million. If you put them on a Delta rocket, it costs $78 million. They're kind of all over the place. But what I wanted to show you here is, and by the way, it depends on whether or not you're going to be using the entire rocket or whether several people are going to be sharing that rocket. If you were putting a small satellite up with a bunch of other stuff, you might want to go with something that had a low cost per pound to orbit. But if you had to buy the whole rocket in order to go someplace, you might want a rocket that didn't cost a lot to launch. So for example, the space shuttle, the cost per pound to orbit, $143,000, very expensive, okay? So the kinds of things that you put on the shuttle would be very different from if you wanted to launch a standard communication satellite, for example. But look at what Musk is doing. So he's down here at the bottom. He's the Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavy. He's got the price for the Falcon 9 at $55 million and the price to orbit of $5,000. So we've always thought that the cost to get to orbit is $10,000. He says he can get it to a point where it's $1,000, that it's an order of magnitude cheaper to get to orbit than it's always been. So he's got it at $5,000. The Falcon Heavy, which he's bringing online now, $3,000 a pound, and he thinks he can get it down to $1,000. And what that means is that for a Saturn V that costs $2.3 million to get an astronaut into space, the Falcon Heavy can do it for $600,000. So let's look at these economics. If you wanted to put somebody on a Soyuz and get them up to the International Space Station, the Russians would charge you $86 million for a seat. Now that $86 million you can see in the Soyuz cost them $8 million. So they're making some money. When Elon Musk sells you a seat in his Dragon capsule, he's doing it for $56 million and it's costing him $1 million. So there is some serious money to be made. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about how some of these rich people in America got their money. So you've got somebody like Warren Buffett, who the Oracle of Omaha with Berkshire Hathaway, and he made his money through value investing. He looked at companies. He said, this is going to be growth, and he's held it for a long time. And so he's got $115 billion. You've got somebody like Mark Zuckerberg, who is a coder, and he puts together this app for students in Ivy League schools to be able to put up their favorite music and stuff on the internet. And so he invents Facebook. Jeff Bezos had an online bookstore and started adding more and more things to Amazon, and now he's a very successful guy. Bill Gates, a prodigy programmer, and came up with software, and so he's done very well. And then there's Elon Musk, who has a lot of money and kind of got his start through banking and PayPal, and so I wanted to look at him. So here you have Elon, who his parents had money, but he's not like Donald Trump in that he has money because he was given a lot of money. For Elon, at age 12, he designs a video game. He sells it to a PC magazine, and he gets $500. At age 24, he develops something called Zip2, and that's kind of a travel program to link you to restaurants and maps of the area and things like that. And he sells that to Compaq, and his cut of the $307 million is $22 million. And then at age 41, he's involved with a group that ends up becoming PayPal, and they end up selling to eBay. And the sale is 1.5 billion, of which he gets 176 million. So now he's got some money, and you can see in the lower left that actually his uber wealth is really quite recent, in just the last couple of years. But the things that he's been involved in, and he's been involved in the space stuff for 20 years, he's handling some of the most incredibly difficult, challenging things in industry. It's breathtaking. So with PayPal, that's kind of reimagining banking. SpaceX is turning spaceflight on its head. Tesla is moving ahead with electric cars and self-driving cars in the automotive field. Solar City, renewable energy. He's doing stuff with artificial intelligence. The Boring Company is one that builds tunnels for mass transit. This is the company that decided to get some PR by selling flamethrowers. He's kind of got this very youthful, almost juvenile kind of a streak in him, as well as being, I don't know if he's a genius, but a remarkable engineer. Now, some people will say, well, he's kind of Robert Downey Jr. He's Tony Stark. He's Iron Man. But if you talk to Musk, he says, the way in which he's successful is, he says, you take risks, you take them now, you make them bold risks, and you keep pushing until you make it happen. And he says, I'm not Tony Stark. I've got 5 kids. I like to go to Disneyland. I don't show up at parties in bow ties, that sort of thing. And yet you look in the lower right-hand corner, and here is this electric car that this guy has built. and he's sent it into outer space in his rocket ship. So if he isn't Tony Stark and Iron Man, I don't know who is. And his idea of how to work on very, very difficult problems is truly remarkable. Instead of kind of eating away at the fringes and making things a little bit better, he envisions them very differently. So for example, you look at internet communications. The cost to transition from 4G to 5G with fiber optic cable is $150 billion. Instead, what he's done is he's putting up satellites and using his Starlink, and it's costing him $10 billion to do the same thing. And it's going to be faster. And faster is worth real money. So he's turning that industry on its head. So you look at, for example, with fiber, you take a fiber packet going from London to New York, and it has to travel 12,800 kilometers, and it does so in 63 milliseconds. Now, there are packet switching that adds kind of delays, and so the shortest time is 76 milliseconds. But with Starlink, and he can do Starlink two ways. You can either put it in a geostationary orbit, which is pretty far out, or in a low Earth orbit. Now, the geostationary, that's 36,000 kilometers. And it turns out that, to go all the way out to the satellite, come all the way back, 240 milliseconds. Doesn't sound like a lot, but in computer time, it's a lot. But when you put Starlink at 550 kilometers, the trip to go out and back is 3.6 milliseconds. And each one of these Starlink transceivers, it has 5 directional laser transceivers on it, and it's looking to see which satellite to send it to that's going to be the fastest path, and they're able to make a trip between London and New York in the Starlink system and complete it in 42 milliseconds. And time is everything. When you can shave a couple of milliseconds off the time it takes for internet traffic, that's worth millions. So Starlink is going to be up to 20 milliseconds faster than other data transfer methods. And so I'm not going to say he's going to have a monopoly on this, but he's going to have a very attractive, very inexpensive system for doing this, for getting internet and having that kind of traffic. And this is just one of the industries that he's doing it. And this shot here is showing 60 of his satellites being launched from a rocket that he's built. I mean, the companies that do internet, the companies that have satellites, aren't the companies that build the rockets that put up their satellites, but this guy is doing that. Now, this was kind of interesting. So a couple of years ago, a retired military satellite, Russian military satellite, clipped an Iridium-33 satellite. Iridium is part of a satellite phone communications network. And anytime you clip something going 22,000 miles an hour, it's going to be messy. So it turns out that there were over 500 pieces of debris from the Iridium and over 1,300 from the Cosmos satellite. These are all bigger than 4 inches in size. Now, some of that stuff, it kind of decays, it falls out of the atmosphere, it burns up. But some of this stuff is going to be up for a long time. There's all kinds of space junk out there. So what we have in low Earth orbit and the likelihood that things are going to get hit is a big problem. They're constantly moving the International Space Station because they're afraid that it's going to get hit by something. So here's the Iridium. It's part of a constellation of 66 satellites. But to give you an idea of how different SpaceX is, Starlink already has 2,400 satellites up, and that's kind of the first shell. They're going to do a second shell, and he puts up 60 of them at a time in his own rocket. I was sitting with my dad talking about the Webb telescope, and I said, it's kind of crazy that that we don't do any more exploration. You know, we went to the moon, but we don't seem to want to go anywhere else. And he said, you know, there's no place else to go. You know, you could go to Mars, but that's going to take you 6 months. And things are just too far away. You know, the closest star is 4 light years away, and you just can't get anywhere in a lifetime. So he says that's why people aren't going into space, because there's no place to go. He said, well, you know, if you could go someplace with a wormhole or quantum entanglement, then, you know, maybe we would have space travel. And I'd never heard of quantum entanglement before, and I wanted to look it up. Now, I want to share with you what my understanding is, and just know that I'm a volunteer with NASA, and it's not because I'm a retired scientist. I don't have a degree in that. I'm a healthcare guy, a retired healthcare guy. But I looked it up, and what I found was just remarkable, and I want to share it with you. So quantum entanglement, it says when two particles, like two pairs of photons or electrons, they become entangled. What that means is that there was a relationship between these two particles that can be, it doesn't matter what the distance between the two particles is. And it could be tempting to think that somehow the particles are communicating with each other, or one's going to the other one or something like that. And that's not the case. But, you know, subatomic particles have certain values associated with them. So a quark or a lepton or a muon, you know, they might have an up, down, left, right spin, or they might be strange or charmed. They have characteristics. Well, if you have entangled particles, if you know some value about one particle, you can deduce what the value in the other particle is. It might be the same thing. They might both be up, or you might know from looking at one particle that the other one, because this one is up, that one is going to be down. And it's because they have this entanglement, they have this relationship. And I was trying to wrap my head around this. So I'm looking at these dancers over here on the left, and you can imagine if they're doing Swan Lake and these two ballerinas are next to each other, that and they're dancing the same way. You look at one and you know that the one next to it is about to pirouette because that one's pirouetting. So you see that they're entangled, right? But it turns out that it doesn't matter what the distance is. You could have these two dancing and they could be very, very far away. And yet you can make some sort of assumptions about one because you're looking at the other. And I was thinking about, when you look out on the night sky, well, the late afternoon sky, and you see a flock of tens of thousands of birds, and they're flying in kind of this magical shape. And so there's obviously some relationship. Now, whether or not they're communicating with each other and saying, I'm about to turn left, you turn left, I don't know. But there is something going on there, okay? And I'm certainly not saying that these birds that there's quantum entanglement, but just that here is an entity, and you can make you can explain something about another entity based on this relationship, and there's obviously a relationship there. And so NASA is looking at that. They have something called CQ, and that's Space Entanglement and Annealing Quantum Experiment. And what they've done, they've put this on the International Space Station, is they are creating entanglement. They're shooting a photon through a crystal and producing two photons of lower energy that have a quantum entanglement. And so of the reading I've done, will quantum entanglement permit us to explore space? I don't think it does. Now, maybe wormholes do, or some other kinds of technology other than warp drive from Star Trek. But I don't think quantum entanglement is going to do it for us. So back to SpaceX. I looked at this picture in the upper left-hand corner. This is Bob and Doug. They are test pilots with NASA. They're astronauts. And I looked at that picture and I just found it remarkable. And let me tell you why. In the upper right-hand corner, you've got this, I think, pretty ugly looking spacecraft. It's a kind of a modified Apollo command module sitting on what looks like a Saturn V. And it looks like it's got some solid rocket boosters from the space shuttle on it. It's a kind of an odd looking kludge. And it's taken 5 major contractors to create this thing. And it's on the launch pad right now. They're going to launch this thing. And it's required Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and Aerospace Rocketdyne and Jacobs and Boeing to create it. Now let's go back to Bob and Doug. Bob and Doug are waving to us, and they're in spacesuits. Okay, now these spacesuits are made by Elon Musk. Okay, there's never been a manufacturer of spacesuits that has built a rocket ship. Okay, but Elon Musk built these spacesuits. They're about to jump into a Tesla, which is an electric car that is going to drive them to the rocket. Now the booster, the Falcon 9 and the spacecraft, the Dragon, are made by SpaceX. Everything is made by SpaceX. The clothes you're wearing, the car you're driving in, the booster you're getting on, the spacecraft you're flying in, it's all SpaceX. And the communications that you're going to end up using is going to be the internet from Starlink. And the idea that this is all coming together from one guy's vision and a company that wasn't around 20 years ago, it floors me. So here we're looking at SpaceX, and Falcon 9 has launched 158 times. And of that, 156 were full successes and 1 was a partial success. And the Block 5, has flown 99 times and always successful. So on the left, all of that green there, and much of that is Starlink, but a lot of that, all of that green there is all success, commercial and governmental success. And over on the right, you see all that blue, that's him landing the boosters. He was landing them on the land, and all that blue, he's landing them on ships out at sea. So he's reusing all of this stuff. I mean, he's not only the first person to take NASA astronauts from on a private company's rocket to the International Space Station, but he sent NASA astronauts in his reused spacecraft up to the International Space Station. He's put people in there that aren't astronauts. He put 4 people in a fundraiser for St. Jude Research Hospital. He put them in orbit for 3 days. Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. And the whole reason he's doing it is this. I believe Elon Musk wants to spend his last days on the planet Mars. When we were watching Apollo in the late 1960s, the question was, what was going to be the follow-on? And the answer was, we were going to go to Mars. Well, when was that going to happen? And the answer was 10 or 15 years. And every time we ask that question, the answer is in 10 or 15 years. We never got any closer. Not at all. Until now. And it's not because of NASA. It's because of Elon Musk and SpaceX. He has done remarkable work in the last 10 years of creating reusable spacecraft and new technologies and bringing down the cost of getting things into orbit. And his latest spacecraft, the ones that you see here, are ones that are going to be capable of going to Mars. And so in the past, we've said 10 or 15 years, and it's always been 10 or 15 years. I believe that in 10 years, Elon Musk is going to be on Mars, that there's going to be a colony on Mars, and it's going to be because of SpaceX. And I find that remarkable. And that's all I have to share with you today. And I would love to entertain comments or questions. Let me stop sharing.
So David, can you repeat that last part for us? So you think within 10 years that Elon Musk will be living on Mars?
I believe in a decade there will be a colony on Mars, and if Elon Musk wanted to be on Mars 10 years from today, I believe he could take one of those spots.
Oh boy. All right. So if anyone has any questions or comments for David, please get them into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll happy to pass them along. So Robert asks, and this was right at the beginning of the talk, how do control signals go far enough to get computers to work?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. We're saying that we're sending signals from the ground to control spacecraft in flight.
Yeah, so Robert, if you want to clarify that with an additional question or comment, please do so. And then Mike also has a question that hopefully you can answer. Mike says, what is the failure rate and what is the cost to avoid failure?
Well, one of the the remarkable things, one of the ways in which Musk has been successful where other people have not, is he's used a highly iterative phase way of learning. So with NASA, they do incremental testing. They will test a component to death, and then they'll put it with another one, and then test those things to death. And they did that early with the Redstone and the Atlas and the Titan, and then with the Saturn programs. And early, when they were talking to Robert Gilruth, the head of the program, and they were using monkeys, they were putting monkeys up instead of astronauts, and they asked him. They said, well, it looks like we're going to have to do another 150 monkey flights before we can send up an astronaut. And he said, well, we might as well just move the program to West Africa then. He says, we have to take some risk. We have to, what they did with Apollo was they did something called all-up testing. And they did that with Apollo 6. This was in 1967, and they put all the components together. And this is not the way that Wernher von Braun wanted to go. He was a very much an incremental tester. But NASA said, you know what, we're never going to get anywhere unless we just put the thing together, we fly it, we learn from it. And so what Musk was doing was originally he was using a lot of carbon fiber, which is very expensive, very difficult to work with. And instead what he did was he moved to stainless steel, which is a lot easier to work with and a lot cheaper. And so he will just put something up and it blows up and he learns from it and he does better. And so the first couple of rockets that he did, they blew up, and now virtually nothing is blowing up. He's doing a remarkable job. And that's a long way of getting to the idea of you get safer and a lot more successful because you give yourself permission to fail. Now, obviously you want to fail with unmanned vehicles, but he's gotten his stuff to the point where the reliability is every bit as good as Soyuz, every bit as good as Saturn or the Delta rockets. Just remarkable work.
Renee asks, please tell us about the engineers that Elon Musk is using to accomplish all this. What are their backgrounds, and are they former NASA people?
Oh, I'm sure that there's a lot of back and forth between NASA and the private sector. Even during the Apollo program and all the way back to Mercury, there was a heavy component of contractors. NASA is not so much hiring a bunch of engineers as they are managers of programs. So they'll let a contract to develop a rocket engine, and NASA will do the coordination and integration and qualification and things like that. So I'm sure that there are lots of engineers that go between Blue Origin and SpaceX and NASA, and yeah. My understanding is that Musk is a very difficult person to work for, but I think he's also a genius. So, and he's getting things done. So it must be interesting as an engineer to decide that you want to be a part of that team.
Virginia asks, what's to prohibit Elon from dictating his own terms when he becomes one of our major space companies, such as increasing the cost by a large amount, or even refusing to send up something or someone he disagrees with?
Oh, the answer is nothing. If you're a private corporation, you can do whatever you want. That said, in order for a business model to work, you have to have customers. Now, one of his big customers right now is Starlink, which is his own stuff, but he needs to make money selling, rides for satellites and for astronauts and things like that. So obviously, if the U.S. government or someone else doesn't like something or wants something done, they're the paying customer, and he has to respond to the market.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So Congress really hasn't gotten around to regulating commercial space flight yet, David?
Well, there is regulation. It's under the Federal Aviation Administration. So, for example, you can't have a spaceport, in the same way that you couldn't decide to have an airport without the FAA being involved. You can't have a spaceport. You can't land a spaceship someplace without the FAA being involved. So Richard Branson, who's got Virgin Galactic, he has a very specific corridor that the FAA has given him in New Mexico to fly his Virgin Galactic stuff. When Blue Origin goes up with Jeff Bezos, he has to have permission from the FAA to do it. And same thing with Elon Musk. When he's doing his stuff out of Boca Chica or at Vandenberg or at Cape Canaveral, all that stuff is regulated by the FAA.
So Lawrence actually has a question about Boca Chica. He wants to know, why is the federal government inhibiting Super Heavy at Boca Chica? Can you translate that into English for us, David?
Yeah, a little bit. Any rocket is a potential to be a bomb. Okay, it's full of highly explosive fuel, and then you set it off, and it's going supersonic, and this thing is close to populated areas, or you can do all kinds of environmental damage. And so the government is particularly concerned when private enterprise develops enormous rockets, and this is big stuff. It's unproven technology. It has the potential for all kinds of catastrophe. That being said, he is remarkably successful, and I think that the government should make a special effort to assist him in being successful.
Renee asks, what is Elon Musk's vision for Mars? How long would it take to get to Mars? Is this a one-way trip? And if not, how long would it take via Musk's technology to return to Earth?
Well, the distance to go to Mars depends on the trajectory. Buzz Aldrin, who studied orbital mechanics at MIT and went to the moon with Neil Armstrong in Apollo 11, has done some work on trajectories to get to Mars, and he's actually come up with some ways to get there faster. I mean, some of it has to do with the specific impulse of the rocket engines that you use, how fast you fly there, that sort of thing, and how far away Mars is when you decide to go. Imagine that it's going to take somewhere between 6 months and 9 months to get there. It does not have to be a one-way trip, particularly if you can generate fuel on the surface of Mars so that you can have the return trip. and that technology will be available very soon. So it does not have to be a one-way trip. Imagine that if you're going to go to Mars, you're probably going to be away from home for probably at least 2 years. I mean, if it took you 6 months to get there and 6 months to get back, you'd certainly want to be there for a little bit. So imagine that it's at least a 2-year endeavor.
So David, I have an unstable internet connection all of a sudden, so I'm going to do my best here. Lawrence had a couple of other questions. How close behind is China in achieving reusable rockets? And has there been a problem at SpaceX with espionage?
I don't know the answer to either one of them, except to say that we routinely see Musk reusing his rockets, and we've never seen anyone else do it. I'm trying to remember if Blue Origin has done it. I don't know that they have. The Chinese they're particularly opaque, but I don't think that they've done any reuse technology.
So folks, last call for questions. Lawrence says, if Elon is to spend his last days on Mars, who is going to follow him? And I'm not sure if Lawrence means literally or in terms of who's going to take over SpaceX, or if he means who's actually going to go to Mars with him. But I guess, is there a succession plan if and when? I mean, Elon's obviously a young guy, but what happens to the SpaceX program if Elon goes away?
Oh, I'm sure it will continue. You know, when I think of Elon Musk, I think of two people. One is Steve Jobs, and there was a visionary who didn't try to decide what it was that could be improved. He created new things and then got you to want them. You know, so obviously there's still an Apple after Steve Jobs. It's not the same. It doesn't have that spark of genius. It's a different kind of enterprise, but it's quite successful. And I'm sure that going forward, SpaceX will be successful and be a big company. I don't think Elon Musk is, you know, he's the be all end all, but he may be the Steve Jobs of SpaceX. He may be that spark that made it what it is, and will always be the brightest light in that firmament. I don't know. The other person that he reminds me a lot of is Henry Ford. Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile, but he transformed it. So what Henry Ford did was he created a production line and was able to mass produce cars and make them so cheap that the average person could have their own car. And that's what Musk is doing. So in addition to creating these technologies like being able to land boosters, he is learning how to make spacecraft cheap. He's not only reusing them, but he's making lots and lots of them, and it's driving down the costs. And he says that's the tough part. He says it's not so much the inventing the technology, it's inventing the production lines. You know, it's as if you were Henry Ford, and it's not so much that, you know, designing a car. It's creating a production line and creating the technology so you can have cheap cars. That's pretty cool. And that's what he's doing in spaceflight.
All right, so folks, we're going to take a few more questions and then we're going to wrap up. Mike says the New York Times had an article that credited Boeing's willingness to join commercial space contracts, and that caused Congress to pass the law that allowed NASA to do such contracts. What is your opinion on this?
That may very well be true. You know, Boeing has been involved. They were involved in the Saturn program and in Apollo, and they've certainly been involved for the longest time. Their reputation is kind of tarnished these days. I mean, their space work as of late has not been very good. They've also had problems with their airplane, the 737 MAX, and not so much that airplanes have problems and crash, because that happens. But I guess my issue with Boeing is that when they had those accidents, instead of saying, oh, maybe there's a problem with our airplane, they blame the pilots. And they should be better than that. So I'm kind of down on Boeing these days. But yeah, I'm sure they kind of encouraged Congress to open the doors for commercial space, and the person that's really walking through it is Elon Musk.
So despite all of Elon's potentially world-changing efforts at SpaceX, he's been in the news a lot lately for a different reason. And Renee asks in the chat, with all his efforts with space, why is Elon interested in Twitter?
Oh, he's interested in everything. I mean, if you look at the work that he's done with the Boring Company, he's trying to put a tunnel between San Francisco and Los Angeles. He's doing something called the Hyperloop, where you're going to have these vacuum assisted tubes, transporting people around. He's doing a lot of work in artificial intelligence. He was doing a lot of stuff in the banking industry. It's not that he doesn't have work that he can do in spaceflight. I think he seems to enjoy that the most. But I mean, he's doing a ton of stuff, right?
And David asks in the chat, how can we reach you for further questions? And David,
I would love to have people contact me. And what I will do is in the chat, I'll put my email address.
Great. So folks, we are going to wait a second. Folks like to do this. Last question goes to Renee. Is Elon Musk doing anything regarding beam me over technology? And I'm not sure what that means, but hopefully you do, David. Is Elon doing anything with beam me over technology?
I don't know what that means. I don't know, but when I get off this call, I'm going to go and look it up.
That's a wonderful. Like beam me over Scotty? We're talking like Star Trek.
Guess.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I guess.
All right. Yes, Renee says Star Trek. Yes. Okay. I guess we're not quite there yet, although I guess nothing would surprise me with what Elon's investing in and working on. So David, do you have any last words before we wrap up?
Well, I love looking up this stuff, and I love sharing my excitement about spaceflight. And if you've enjoyed this talk, then what I want you to do is contact Robert and say, let's have David come back. And particularly if you have an idea of a topic we can talk about, I would love to do that. So please invite me back, because I love meeting with you guys.
And to David's point, so for those watching live, please fill out the feedback survey that I email you tomorrow. Indicate if you enjoyed the program. And at the very bottom, there is a question to recommend future topics. So please take advantage of that. So I want to thank David. I want to thank the 55 of us or so that were watching. I want to thank the libraries who partnered with Tewksbury for today's event. And those include Ashland, Andover, and Groton. And yeah, I hope to see many of you at future NASA Solar System Ambassador Zoom programs. We're going to line some up for June, July, and August. And I have a feeling that we'll be seeing David again. So thank you all so much. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. And go Celtics. All right. Have a good one, David. Thanks so much.